Electrical signals in neurons are generated by the movement of charged molecules, ions, across the cell membrane. Neurons use active pumps, in other words, ATP-consuming pumps, to move ions against the concentration and voltage gradients, and gated channels or pores in the membrane allow neurons to flow and release the electrical potential stored in these gradients at appropriate times. Certain ions are especially relevant for neuronal communication, including sodium and potassium cations, positively charged ions, calcium, which has a charge of +2, and chloride, an anion with a charge of -1. Let's take a closer look at the neuron, in particular the membrane that separates the inside of the neuron from the outside, known as the extracellular matrix. In neurons, like all cells, the cell membrane is composed of 2 layers of phospholipids, or fats, studded with many proteins. When intact, this lipid bilayer is impermeable to many types of molecules, including small charged ions, like sodium, potassium, calcium, and chloride. For an ion to cross the plasma membrane, to move from inside a neuron to outside or vice versa, it has to move through an ion channel, which looks like a small pore or tunnel between the inside and outside of the cell, or it has to be transported by a pump, which uses energy. Both channels and pumps are large, often complex, multi-part proteins that are synthesized in the cell body and inserted in the plasma membrane. Ion channels are basically pores, with the protein creating an opening through which ions can pass, but often very specific pores that only allow one particular type of ion to flow across the membrane. For example, certain channels will only allow potassium through. Other channels might only allow sodium. Channels at any moment in time can be open or closed. When they're open, they allow ions of their preferred type to flow. When they're closed, nothing can get through. Which direction an ion flows through an open channel will depend on the electrical and chemical forces acting on that ion. More on that in the next video. Some channels are open all the time, or they open and close randomly with some probability. These are also referred to as resting or leakage channels. Other channels will open in response to specific conditions or events, either in the cell or in the external environment. Many different things can cause channels to open. For example, mechanical stimulation, such as pressure or stretching, binding of a particular chemical, or changes in the electrical gradient across the membrane that the channel is embedded in. Ion channels of this last type, which open or close based on the voltage across the membrane, are called voltage-gated channels, and they will be particularly important for allowing neurons to send electrical signals. Pumps are different than ion channels in that they require energy to move the ion from one side of the membrane to another. Because they use energy, pumps can move ions against their electrical or concentration gradients. In other words, from lower to higher concentration. More on that in the next video. As we'll discuss later, many ions exist in different concentrations inside versus outside of the neuron, and pumps are responsible for creating and maintaining these gradients.